Right, okay, so a look at the first sensory lab, which will cover sensitivity in the triangle test. This is of course covered in detail in the relative British Standard, and you will be looking at it for the open book resource for the exam. This is a map of the range of classes of sensory tests. Again, as I said, we'll look at them in lectures and do several of them in the labs, starting with sensitivity in the triangle test, which is an example of a difference test. Sensitivity tests are used to choose people for professional sensory panels in order to ensure they have a good range of taste sensitivity. On the other hand, difference tests are often used with consumers to find out if they can tell the difference between related products. Okay, so super tasters. The ability to taste bitterness is genetically linked. Adults who can taste prop are usually more sensitive to bitter taste and fattiness, and often show less acceptance of foods that are high in these taste characteristics. You click on the link there with the picture of the tongue and the video of the people sat around a table, you get a lot more information on this. Since super tasters are somewhat outside the general run of human taste sensitivity, this is not used in any British standard or any other international standard, but it is of interest. It may be used to screen out super tasters from being chosen as assessors, trained or otherwise. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to test yourself. Very straightforward process, and there'll be 3 results. No taste, the taste a bit bitter. You're going to go, ah! And then recording a survey, which is just a little online survey thing. Yeah, so you try the test, record your response in this form. Either use a scan the QR code or click on the image, and then we'll discuss the class results and think about whether there's any trends. So we will now look at a test that measures an individual's sensitivity for a range of standard food tastes. Again, this is useful for selecting panels of trained assessors. That's a relevant British standard, which you should review, because you'll be, as a group, writing a summary of this for the open book resource, and it can be obtained from the library as usual. Here's some terms and definitions taken from the British Standard. And again, these are likely to be relevant for your preparation of the exam material, but I'm not going to labour them here. Okay, so this test involves sampling the basic tastes, ones you're familiar with, plus metallic as well. There are 8 bottles for each taste, with 8 being and they're numbered, with 8 being the least concentrated and 1 the most. Staff will advise you of the procedure in the lab. Then there's a spreadsheet, which is named there. The spreadsheet will calculate the overall results for the group, which may allow you to at least tentatively address the question in the box. Is it possible to draw any general conclusions about the physiology of taste from your results? What will happen is you'll be given an assessor number, which will correspond to a tab in the worksheet. You see the tabs along the bottom of the worksheet. Make sure you only use your tab. Each assessor tab has the instructions. Read them before starting and follow them carefully. The cells with the white backgrounds, which have numbers, for example, acid 0, 1, 0 and 1 here, should be empty. If not, just clear the numbers from them. Don't clear the numbers from anywhere else. To get good results, you do need to try all of the samples. And what you're basically doing is you start at the least concentrated. And if you can't taste it, you put a 0 down. Then the next least concentrated. Again, if you can't taste it, you put a 0 down. Until the point that you can taste it, then you put a 1 down. You might want to try the next one as well, but make sure you put the 1 in the cell where the first point you detected it. You should have a series of 0s and then a 1 in each of your table cells. Yeah, and when it's finished, we'll go to the summary tab. Staff in the lab will go to the summary tab and discuss the results. It reports the results for each taste across the group, and looking at the results, you may be able to draw some tentative conclusions. The results here we're seeing are just sort of random numbers I put in. We'll make sure the spreadsheet's empty before we start. Okay, moving on to difference tests, and specifically the triangle test. There are a number of these tests, of which the triangle test is a good example. Once you've done the triangle test, the basis of the other tests should be clear to you. But you will want to look them up probably in the British Standards and other resources. Watch the video here. This has some good background. on how it's done and the basis of the test, and the link there to the Society of Sensory Professionals is always a good resource. They have lots of good information, including definitions of what's going on. Okay, so again, review the British Standard. As is often the case, the details and background of the test are quite complex. Even the test is quite straightforward in practice, so don't get too worried about the depth that the British Standard goes into. Basically, we have 3 similar samples, 2 of which are the same, 1 of which is different, and assessors are trying to identify the different sample. If not, they just record their best guess. The statistics are designed to allow for that. We use 3 samples, as I mentioned, 2 of which are the same, 1 the other different. We label these as A, B and C, and the image there shows the possible ways in which the samples can be presented. However you do this, you must always be consistent as described here. Again, there's a spreadsheet which will collect the results, start the analysis of the results. As we'll discuss soon, groups will be organising the process with different food samples. Some technicalities of British Standard, a list of definitions which you would certainly include in the report for any sensory procedure you take part in. So the alpha risk, some definitions of it there. It's essentially the probability of a false positive. Note the evidence column in the table, ranging from a slight evidence that in effect a difference was apparent to a very strong evidence that difference was apparent. It has to be said, statistically it's quite hard to get to the very strong category of evidence. The beta list is the opposite, really. It's the probability of a false negative. Again, note the differences in the table labels. The PD value, proportion of, is used for a number of things. You can use it to both define the number of assessors who detect a perceptible difference between the samples, and also to determine the number of assessors needed to have a valid test. It looks a bit complicated, but it's really just a matter of reading tables based on known values, or values you've obtained. This is what it comes down to. Is there good evidence for either proposition? A difference could be detected, or a difference could not be detected. So in practice, again, see this spreadsheet, which is just a question of reading using data. It doesn't really need to be a spreadsheet. Here we have, in this example, we have 10 samples and 7 correct responses. That is to say, people who are able to identify the different sample. So we read across from 10 and find the alpha values for 7 and above, of which there are 3 which are highlighted here. So therefore we can say a perceptible difference exists at alpha equals 0.05, 0.01 and 0.001. Okay, so some practical issues, which we'll look at, and also some exam related issues. In the exam, groups using the relevant British standards will produce in detailed technical briefs for sensory methods, which may include consideration of these issues. We'll discuss this in sessions, and you'll be expected to develop professional standard guidance for using a particular test. Okay, there's the test environment. Again, something we'll to start thinking about. More on this in lectures. It depends on a number of things, not least the size of the organisation which is doing this. There's a difference between a small startup company and a large multinational food company in terms of the resources they have. But again, some information there for the exam. Okay, so for the triangle test, we have a range of samples, and the 2 groups will organise their testing and then change roles with different foods so everyone gains experience. And you collect and analyse the results. Right, okay. Sorry, lost where the mouse is there. Hopefully we'll have a sensory rules available, which will allow us to make it quite a bit more formal than we would do if we were doing it in the open lab. Okay, so the test report. This is again something for the exam. This is an outline of a full report for a sensory process. Groups will look at developing this into a formal report format for use in the exam. So have a look at the presentation, stop the video and look at the various categories involved then, and start doing a little bit of thinking about them. Other ways to document, which we are familiar with. As we know, videos can easily be recorded using Adobe Spark. There's an example there we've seen on veganism. The SP link takes you to Spark, and the other video link explains how people can collaborate on video projects. So this might be a good way of documenting your process for these labs. Certainly something I'd like you to do. Okay, a possible bonus, roll of drums. Yes, we'll be having the world's most flammable cheese, and possibly some edible Norwegian flags to go along with it. We shall see. Okay, that's all folks. Thanks for listening.